Strongmen are doubling down now because they know their time is limited. These guys are not getting any younger, this cohort of people. And their scams are being revealed. So they're rapaciously clinging to power right now. They're trying to exploit and hoard everything. They're doubling down on their use of, their alliances with arms dealers, with fossil fuel barons. They're trying to get as much as possible because they know they're the old paradigm of leadership, and they have to do everything to block the new from emerging. But I think they won't succeed, and here's why.
Velina manoa ikale hua aloha, aloha ua tua hine, mai lua hine a iwai ki, kia ike ka hau kani, kani no na leo, eo kama aina aloha e manoa e.
Aloha. I think I have to go a bit off script and just thank Tyler, sorry. Tyler, turn around. So Tyler Ramos, one of our own, Dr. Tyler Ramos, I want to thank him for that moving rendition. That was the Ukraine national anthem that he played first. And of course, the Queen's. And of course, then the Queen's Prayer, which she composed while under house arrest, as most people in the room know. Thank you, Tyler. So, I'm Michael Bruno. I'm provost here. Thank you, Governor Abercrombie. I'm provost here at UH Manoa. I want to welcome everyone to a very special event, a presentation by Professor Ruth Ben-Ghiat, the 2023 Daniel and Maggie Inouye Distinguished Chair in Democratic Ideals. I think it's fair to say that we come together tonight at a time when there is recognition, widespread recognition, that we can no longer take democracy for granted. All around the world, we've seen the rise of divisive anti-democratic movements, and we gather here tonight essentially marking the one-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. These are very uncertain and even anxious times, but universities are optimistic places, and we have a vital role to play in meeting the significant challenges that lie all around us. In a very real sense, and in my opinion, universities are machines for creating good citizens. They are places where people from all different places, backgrounds, lived experiences come together to study, to debate, to learn, practice critical thinking, research, and shared facts. That's why this evening is so important. In founding this program, Senator Inouye and his wife Maggie were prescient in focusing on the promotion of democratic ideals. The senator's legacy of great sacrifice in the defense of democracy and his decades of service to the people of Hawaii continue strongly through this program. We are honored here at Manoa to host the Daniel Maggie Distinguished Chair in Democratic Ideals, and I think it's so appropriate that the program is jointly administered by the William S. Richardson School of Law and the interdisciplinary American Studies Department within the College of Arts, Languages, and Letters. Our speaker tonight has dedicated her career to researching anti-democratic movements and how they can be overcome. That's the optimistic part of what the university does. To introduce her, it is my great pleasure to invite my colleague, Professor Maya Soetoro, to the stage. Not unlike our speaker, Maya has dedicated her career to history, peace, education, and justice. Dr. Soetoro is an alumna of UH Manoa and is a professor in our Matsunaga Institute for Peace. Maya.
Aloha kako, friends. It's good to see you. Thank you, Michael, for that wonderful introduction. Mahalo to all of you for joining us this evening. Let us briefly acknowledge this land on Oahu, where we stand and gather, which has been sustainably nourished by Kanaka Maoli for generations. Those of us who are settlers on this land offer thanks for the great privilege of being able to live, study, teach, and raise our children here. Mahalo. We have so many brave people with us tonight. Many friends, people whom I admire, people of poetry and thought, of mana'o, of great mana. We have here new Hawaii residents and friends who have fled their homes in Ukraine as violence continues to do harm there. Your resilience is admirable, and we welcome you. Others of you I see here have lived through and struggled against authoritarian regimes all over the world, in China and Hong Kong, in earlier times in Korea and Taiwan and the Philippines, historically, and with too much déjà vu. In the United States, of course, we've had our own recent experiences with would-be authoritarian rule. As Michael pointed out, and as so many of you know to your bones, democracy is precious, it's fragile, it's something we have to work on, work for, innovate. It is a shared enterprise, a work always in progress, never perfectly realized, not even close. A healthy democracy depends, of course, on nonviolent communication, on conflict transformation, clear thinking, shared facts, civil debate, ongoing dialogue, sound research, independent institutions, place-based education, restorative practices, as well as collective action in pursuit of justice. These are alarming times. With winds of conflict, violent conflict, circulating in Europe, Middle East, Pacific, and elsewhere. And I have spent much of my career in the field of peace education, and I've worked with and been inspired by countless local, national, and global organizations and individuals working to bring peace and justice to their communities from the ground up. These organizations and individuals are represented by many of you here, and it is not just about understanding these dictators, but it is about thinking about how we can contribute, all of us, to building beloved community. Never has this work felt so urgent and vital, so please do consider your role in positive peace building and how you can help. Ruth Ben-Ghiat, thank you for being here. Your work is urgent and vital. Ruth is an acclaimed historian of European fascism, as developed in politics as well as culture. She grew up in California with a large population of refugees who had fled Nazism. She has carried the concerns that she absorbed in childhood and youth into her life's work as she brings nuanced understanding. She's written countless articles and is the author or editor of 6 books, including Strongmen, From Mussolini to Present, about which she will be speaking this evening. Because understanding the history and mechanics of autocratic, polarizing, jingoistic, and often misogynistic rule is critical to understanding how to overcome malevolent misrule and build gorgeous, effective, just communities, Dr. Ben-Ghiat has been working hard to get the message out, to build bridges, and in so doing, create thought partnerships and action partners with many people. She keeps up a relentless schedule of public talks. She's regularly on CNN and MSNBC. She's writing a new book on protecting the center in democratic societies. She edits a newsletter aptly titled Lucid. She is a historical consultant for film and television, all the while teaching a full load at my alma mater, NYU, and raising a daughter. We are so pleased to have you here in Hawaii with us this evening, Ruth. Mahalo for your dedication and insight. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Provost Bruno and Maya. That was a beautiful introduction. And I'm so honored to be here to speak with you today. And I'm very grateful to everyone at the university, including Dean Peter Anade and Bernadette and Betsy and Robert and everyone else who is concerned with the Inouye Chair, who has made it such a wonderful experience, and couldn't be more important to have this chair at this time. And I've already learned so much while I've been here in the classroom and conversations with colleagues in the community, and I look forward to continuing the dialogue. So I'm going to talk a bit about authoritarianism, how to counter it, and then what an anti-authoritarian future might look like. So we're living through historic and fateful times when the global clash between authoritarianism and democracy seems to be coming to a head. Now, authoritarianism is ascendant. Over 70% of the world's population now lives under some variation of illiberal rule. And yet, the spread of authoritarianism has sparked an unprecedented wave of nonviolent resistance that we don't hear about described holistically. And you're going to hear this phrase from me a lot in this talk, we're not hearing about this. So part of this talk is about switching up narratives to inspire courage and inspiration and recognizing what is actually going on the ground. That's important. And there are indications that we are starting a kind of shift away from authoritarian practices of plunder. They're like small things that are starting, but I believe they're significant. The shift is visible in the renaissance of protest, the revival of unions and labor actions, and the beginning of a move away from globalization. Some people use the term slowbalization. Some of this is due to the pandemic, and a move away from fossil fuels. And this last has been accelerated by Russia's genocidal war on Ukraine, and I'll return to that. So that's kind of my, I teach universities, that's my thesis statement. And I will come back to this in the talk. Because the dirty secret of authoritarianism is that it's unsustainable. It's an unsustainable way of being and governing. And authoritarian states have long claimed that they offer a more efficient model of governance. Like Mussolini running the trains on time, which, how do you know if the trains run on time when there's no free press, there's no strikes, et cetera, et cetera. And yet they bring ruin to societies. They're linked for profit motives to energy sources that accelerate the climate crisis. They plunder businesses. We certainly don't hear enough about how Putin and Erdogan and others plunder businesses. And their corruption and repression waste human and other capital and force millions into exile. And a sub-theme of Strongmen, because as Maya mentioned, I kind of got interested in this growing up in like near Malibu, not a place where Nazism, you'd think about it, but there were these anti-Nazi exiles like Thomas Mann and Arnold Schoenberg, and I thought as a teenager, what does it mean to have to leave your country because some awful tyrant comes in? So a sub-theme of Strongmen is exile. The exile communities that form when these people come in. And at a time when we face climate, health, food, and other crises, the priority of authoritarian states is never public welfare, but maintaining stability and keeping the leader in power. So those resisting around the world today, they know that strongmen leaders don't just endanger democracy, but they pose an existential threat to humanity. And yet, hundreds of millions still embrace authoritarian lies and violence. So we need to understand why that happens. And there are patterns in this. And Strongmen is about me as a first-generation American looking back in history globally for patterns. And then it's the first book that put Trump's America in historical perspective. So for 100 years, charismatic leaders have found favor at moments of uncertainty and transition, when traditional parties and political systems no longer seem to need to meet the needs of the moment. And these leaders often come from outside the political system. Many of them, I discovered, have a past in mass communications. They're superb communicators. Could be journalism, like Mussolini and Mobutu. It could be TV, like Berlusconi and Trump. And so they know how to create new movements and generate a lot of excitement. And they communicate with their followers in original ways that seem original and thrilling. So authoritarians also appeal when societies have made recent gains in gender, class, or racial emancipation and equity. So these figures soothe fears of the loss of male domination, of the loss of elite privilege, and in the Euro-American context, the end of white Christian, quote, civilization. Across a century, writing a book like this, it goes over 100 years, you see also that certain categories of enemies recur. Nomadic peoples, Jews and Muslims, LGBTQ communities, indigenous people, and more. And these are the through lines of persecution. So authoritarians get a boost from conservative elites, no matter where they are. They are their most important promoters and collaborators. And these are people who are afraid of losing their privileges. They're influential individuals who bring the aspiring strongmen into the political system, often thinking that he can be controlled. And that never works out for them. Let's say that. They strike an authoritarian bargain. That's a very interesting concept called the authoritarian bargain, developed by economists and political scientists. Prosperity for them, for the elites, in return for loyalty and toleration of his violence and suspension of rights. And here's a depressing but interesting fact. Those who sign on at the beginning, they tend to stick with the leader no matter what happens, no matter what he says or does. And so we have just two contemporary examples: the Russian Orthodox Church support of Putin's genocidal war, and the US Republican Party doubling down on its support for Trump after he attempted to overthrow the government and harm one of their own, Vice President Mike Pence, which I think about that every day. We can talk about that later. So those are two current examples. So in my book, I highlight the tools of rule that have endured for a century, and each chapter goes over 100 years, so you can kind of see what stays the same and what changes. So propaganda, machismo, corruption, and violence, and these are the things that help leaders get to power and stay there. So this is from Joseph Goebbels: in propaganda, as in love, anything is permissible which is successful. So propaganda is a set of communication strategies designed to discourage critical thinking and persuade people that reality is what the leader says it is. Mussolini's slogan was, "Mussolini is always right." Right? And that would be like in your classroom, on the wall. Having a direct communications channel to cement the leader-follower bond is very important, so the reliance on rallies, or today for Bolsonaro and Trump before he get kicked off, Twitter, it has to be direct and unmediated. So is the use of the latest media technologies to seem omnipresent and godly. So here's Modi. When he ran for office, he was a hologram. And so he appeared at like 100 places at the same time. And so this gets into, I'm not going to talk too much about personality cults, but they have to be the man of the people. And so go to Modi's Instagram. It's very convincing, it's like the man of the people. But they have to be the man above all other men. They're omnipotent and they're omnipresent. So here we have the hologram that kind of expresses that. But propaganda is also about changing the way people think and feel through associations. So one of the famous ones from Nazism, Jews equal demonic, right, forces, or blacks equal danger. And you, through repetition, you imprint these associations. So propaganda might seem to be all about noise, but silence is very important to its operation. Strongmen disappear people, I write in my book, and they also disappear knowledge that conflicts with their ideologies and goals. Today's authoritarians, pretty much everywhere, ban books with LGBTQ themes. They suppress climate science. And of course, we're living through an onslaught in the United States of suppressing history of slavery, history of racial discrimination, and more. So the silence, and silence also includes self-censorship. Then you're doing his job for him if you self-censor. That's very important. So here's some select quotes of I can love 4 women at the same time, Duterte. If I sleep for 3 hours, I can make love for 3 hours after that, Silvio Berlusconi, who's still around, back in government. He's not in the government as a minister, but he's still around. So the gender politics of authoritarianism rest on 3 pillars. First, institutionalized misogyny. You've got to put women down. Second, hypermasculine exaltation. You prop men up, right, in their most macho form. Third, suppression, discrimination of other models of manhood and sexual identities. And that's where the anti-gay persecution, anti-trans fits in. And you have all these 3 that work together. So here we have the man of the people. So he's fishing, right? He's doing an everyday activity lots of men do, fishing, but he's the man, of course, above all other men. And these strongmen use their bodies. And by the way, I use the term strongmen as my own definition. They are a subset of authoritarians. They do all the things authoritarians do. They try and wreck democracy, but they use their masculinity and their bodies as a tool of legitimacy. That's how I selected most of the people who were in the book. And here, I tried to have this in my book, but I wasn't able to get the rights. Okay. Why is this here? Because Trump wasn't going to show his body, but so he borrowed Sylvester Stallone's body from Rocky III. And the reason this is important, because yes, we're laughing and it's grotesque, but it's deadly serious because this is not a retweet. This is a product of a personality cult. I very early on predicted, like, I think it was January 2016, I wrote this piece that no one wanted because they thought I was crazy. And I said, if Trump gets the nomination, he's going to have a personality cult. And I compared him to Putin and just the cult. And people were like, I don't know what you're talking about. So no one accepted this op-ed. But indeed, he did develop a personality cult. And what's important is that this is not a retweet. Somebody, maybe him, put this mock-up there and tweeted it out. So it's a personality cult product. And this is how he sees himself, as the fighter. So again, we can laugh at these, but they're deadly serious because the appeal of these leaders is partly in their ability to get away with things that ordinary men cannot. So they're the man above all other men because they're untouchable. They are super, they can boast about their sexual powers, but the real thing they care about is getting away with crime and getting away with corruption and violence. So that's a good segue. It's a long quote, but it expresses an eternal truth of dictatorships. The spies, they make spies of the unscrupulous, sycophants of the ambitious, and conformists of the majority. And we can go back to the self-censorship. And the book is trying to show how the tools interact, right? So you see how the masculinity interacts with the violence and all of that. So corruption, and I talk about both financial corruption, but also moral corruption in a way. It depends on changes in moral codes and professional ethics. It's about getting people to accept things that were previously considered to be illegal or immoral and making normal what used to be unthinkable. So strongmen specialize in bringing the unthinkable into being and having people do what they never thought they would do. And they're innovators in lying, they're innovators in corruption, and they're innovators in violence. They are visionaries to horrible ends. but they think big. That's their thing. They think big, and they get millions of people to be aboard in their projects, so they're innovators. Rulers who come into office with a criminal record, like Mussolini and Hitler, or another favorite thing that strongmen do that other types of people would not do, if you're a politician and you're under investigation, most people don't want to run for office because they're under scrutiny. Strongmen are like, I'm running for office. So Putin, Trump, Netanyahu, and Berlusconi. And the point is, you've got to run for office if you're under investigation, because you got to get back into power and shut down the investigation. So they think, the book was, I had to get in their heads, which was not fun at all, but that's the way to explain their logic, and then you can actually often predict what they're going to do. So they know, because they are criminals, making the government a refuge for lawless people hastens the corruption process. So civil service, bureaucracy, maybe people think that's boring, but they're very, very important to get the right, i.e. the wrong, people in there. So this is why, when you want to track a party that's becoming autocratic, you look at who's leaving and who's coming in. So if you look at the GOP, for example, people like, let's say, Liz Cheney, who is very conservative but believes in the rule of law, she's out. She has nowhere to be now in the GOP. Who's coming in, even more interesting, oath keepers, like violent anti-government extremists, Proud Boys, George Santos, who's perfect. He's a serial fraudster and a con man. Perfect expression of a party that now supports itself as the big lie. You need George Santos there. This is bleak, but this is how they think. And then people who participated in January 6th, they are encouraged to run. So you shift the political elite if you're preparing for autocracy. You can kind of, go away and track that now. Okay, finally, violence. This is a great Putin quote. Blackmail vodka, or the threat of murder, right? So for 100 years, the strongman and his enablers have led the societies they govern to think of harming others as justifiable, necessary, and even patriotic. So propaganda is used to get people to see others as existential threats and give violence a positive value. And I was very honored as a first-generation American to work with the January 6th committee. And part of the report I wrote was they wanted to know about how Trump used violence, who used his rallies to cultivate people for violence and to sell violence as positive relentlessly from 2015. So, and here's the president and Putin puppet of Belarus. And this is interesting because in 2020, protesters were marching near his palace, and he put on body armor, grabbed an assault rifle, and jumped into a helicopter and tried to buzz the protester. This is important because the violence the strongman unleashes is a reaction to his fear. They're actually insecure and afraid. They're afraid of the people they govern. They use blackmail to tie people to them because they're afraid. They throw on a cloak of masculine invincibility. And they build palaces and bunkers to hide in when their mismanagement catches up with them or they make bad decisions. The authoritarian playbook doesn't have a chapter on failure. And every leader who goes into decline due to his own bad decisions is surprised. They always think that they're going to be different. And they blame everyone but themselves. So I want to talk about Putin as a case of what I call autocratic backfire. When you get yourself into a situation and you do something out of hubris and it backfires on you. And this is a picture of some of the hundreds of thousands of Russians who are fleeing the borders because they don't want to fight his war. So Putin was ripe for a decision based on hubris and a lack of objective input. And over the last years, he had become more vulnerable. The pandemic had weakened his economy, his popularity was decreasing, so his need to jail his critics and deceive his people was increasing. And there was a poll conducted by Levada, which is an independent pollster, in 2021. It showed that almost half of Russians, age 18 to 24, felt the country was going in the wrong direction. So this is when strongmen act rashly and they get into this grandiose state where they want to secure their legacy and secure their place in history. So they start wars, or if they're in the middle of a war that's going badly, instead of getting out of the war, they double down. They make bad decisions. Political scientists actually have a name for this because it's common with autocrats. It's called gambling for resurrection. You're gonna like go for broke with your heroic gesture. Most autocrats lose the wager of this gambling game eventually. And if you know this, you can see it coming, which is why 2 days after he invaded Ukraine, I wrote an op-ed for MSNBC, and I was like, this isn't gonna go well for him. You're gonna have elite defections eventually. It's a long process, but it seemed pretty clear that this because the decision was made badly. And in fact, later we learn he didn't consult with most of his military command. He didn't game out the consequences of sanctions with his economic advisors. And this is consistent with one of the fatal flaws of autocrats, where they start to believe their propaganda. And Putin has been there as long as Mussolini now, which is interesting to think about. And they surround themselves with sycophants and flatterers and family members who tell them only what they want to hear. Otherwise, in the case of Russia, they fall out of a window, right? So Putin's war has brought unbelievable catastrophe to Ukraine. Over 14 million people displaced, cities destroyed with terroristic methods. It's not just a war of territorial occupation, it's a war of annihilation. And it's a success that Putin is still in this war for Putin. I wish it had been shut down. You imagine with, if you know autocrats and how they wage war, it should have been shut down like very early by giving Ukrainians what they needed to win. And every day, because it's a war of annihilation, every day he kills Ukrainians is a huge victory for him. But it hasn't gone as he planned. Ukraine has recaptured many cities and over 1,000 kilometers of territory. NATO has been revitalized. And Zelensky is an international democratic hero. Putin didn't see that coming at all. So the war has been, for those who study autocracy, the war has been like the curtain being drawn back on how corruption and repression ravage state institutions, depriving them of resources, and creating false realities through what we call institutionalized lying. It's when no one wants to tell the leader the truth, or even his superior, right? And in the military realm, that's a recipe for disaster. So we've seen that the unbeatable, supposedly Russian military is, badly equipped, badly trained, has awful rations, doesn't have proper uniforms. It reminds me of how Mussolini sent his troops in to World War II. And this is because autocrats couldn't care less if their people live or die. They don't care about their people. They despise their people. They fear their people. So this is also why elites are slowly starting to turn on him. And these are just, I'm not saying this is a widespread thing, but there's a reason that over 24 very powerful people have fallen out of windows or gone into the hospital and never come out just since the war began. So in 1 year, over 24 people. And very interesting things are happening. In September, the municipal councils of Moscow and St. Petersburg actually called for Putin to be removed from office. That is like totally unheard of. So these are like, what I do, I look at the horizon and I look at these things going on. Now maybe they can't go anywhere for the moment. It's very dangerous, but people are doing things that they weren't doing before. That we can say. So strongmen are doubling down now because they know their time is limited. These guys are not getting any younger, this cohort of people. And their scams are being revealed. And latest event to draw back the curtain, the earthquake in Turkey, Erdogan, like his whole plan for, grandiosity and all the things he's doing is a little compromised now. So they're rapaciously clinging to power right now. They're trying to exploit and hoard everything. They're doubling down on their use of, their alliances with arms dealers, with fossil fuel barons. They're trying to get as much as possible because they know they're the old paradigm of leadership and they have to do everything to block the new from emerging. But I think they won't succeed. And here's why. So we're going to be going to the more optimistic part of the talk. Everywhere we look, we see evidence of a new will to stand up for freedom and rights and push back against oppression. It's really moving. We are living through a renaissance of nonviolent protest that constitutes a systemic and global reaction to authoritarianism. In 2019 was a record year for nonviolent protest. And when you have demonstrations in these years, they're often the largest a country has had in many, many years, like China. And you see things are emerging in places like Iran that you don't see protest. There's a reason, right? So look at this. You've seen the images of women cutting their hair in public. So, it's so moving, so dangerous. Look at this, women with uncovered heads, making defiant gestures. Women going onto the bus with an uncovered head in Iran. You also had Chile in 2019. The US, we never talk about the Women's March anymore, but it was the largest social mobilization in US history, 2017. And then 2020, once again the largest in history, Black Lives Matter. 20 million people took part in a Black Lives Matter event. That's a lot of people. And it had electoral outcomes in the midterms and in the 2020 presidential election. The latest is Israel. The protests in Israel are unprecedented for the size and who's in them, who's in the streets right now. So it's no accident that most of these demonstrations are driven by young people. They know it's their future at risk. Their lives will be changed for the worse because of environmental plunder, control of reproductive rights, and state violence. But it's not all youth. In most of these places I've mentioned, the protests are actually multi-generational. We're getting good, analytics on them. And that's important, that they're multi-generational. So by bringing many types of people together, mass protests enact a very effective anti-authoritarian tool, bridge building. And Maya alluded to this. This includes reaching across the divide created by disinformation or hate to find some common ground and establish a dialogue. Or keep relations going with radicalized loved ones or friends. I'm sure everyone seems to have a radicalized loved one. I have one, my mother. She lives in England. She's very old now. And she's a lifelong conservative. We grew up with the Queen. It was like the hero in the house. But during the pandemic, she, was shut in. And she started watching Russia Today, the Kremlin propaganda channel, which has it's been shut down now, but it has, English hosts. They use hosts from the home country. And she became radicalized. So she started talking about Putin, how great he was. She never talked about Putin. And one day she said to me, Putin, and she developed this hatred of Biden, who again, she just didn't really talk about Biden before. And she said, Biden's not doing anything to help Putin. And this was just incredibly crazy because I was teaching a class on propaganda, and we had just gone over the Kremlin information warfare playbook, which is, number one, to get people to act against their own interests, right? Sure, let's have more guns so you can have more gun violence and all this. But two, to see the world, for foreigners, to see the world in the ways the Kremlin needs you to see it. So my mother, like Biden isn't helping Putin, fell right into it. So first I wanted to hang up the phone. I went through a whole process, and I was like, no, you study this. You don't hang the phone up. You have a dialogue. So still working on that. So we don't hear enough, here's my refrain, we're not hearing enough about all the networks and organizations that are out there working to depolarize the US and other countries by creating points of contact among people who have opposing political beliefs. And the thing is, it's not just to get them talking and hearing each other's points of view. It's inspiring, it's rebuilding trust that you can even have a conversation. Because extreme polarization and dehumanization of the other means you're not even going to talk to them. You're just going to kill them, or whatever you're going to do to them. So building confidence that you can have a dialogue is what these organizations do. And some of them operate at a local level. There's one called Braver Angels that brings people together in towns. Some create national coalitions. There's an organization called Bridging Divides, which works with conservatives and progressives. And some harness the power of faith. I'm a huge admirer of the Reverend Barber, Repairers of the Breach. And then some work internationally, like the East-West Center here, for understanding and More in Common. This is another organization called More in Common, and it hires people who are trained in, they worked in conflict zones. So there's like so much going on, but we don't hear about it. So we don't know there's this groundswell of trying to fix things. So now, this is really hard work to do, and you have to do it effectively and move forward. I think we have to accept some hard truths. So here's like the tough love part of the talk. So autocracy, we know it's unsustainable in every way. But democracy in its present form is just not so fulfilling to many millions of people. And so around the world, young people are embracing authoritarian parties and ideologies. A 2021, it's a huge survey of 34 African countries by this organization called Afrobarometer. It found that those aged 18 to 25 were less likely than their elders to consider democracy their preferred form of government. And so we can't just say this is all because of like Fox, I was going to say Fox News, I'm no longer saying news. Fox, whatever, or equivalents, Russia Today. It's something else to do with deficiencies of democracy as they developed. In America, where billionaires and arms dealers have a huge influence on politics, the success of Trump revealed some of these deficiencies. He went after white rural people, the working class, that Democrats had largely neglected, right? But everywhere, democracies can generate loneliness, economic inequality, and a disaffection with politics. And all of that, charismatic demagogues like Trump know how to exploit. So what did he do? He goes in there, he says, "You're the forgotten, and you're forgotten no longer, I love you." Well, they loved it. No one else had ever talked to them that way. So to protect our freedom long term, we can't just turn back autocracy. So here's my little mantra I'm developing. Democracy prevention has to be democracy reinvention, so that future generations will see the appeal and the value of open societies. So that means being open to doing things in new ways, and also see what the adversary is doing well. And here, that's where I study these awful people and how they have success. So progressives might take a cue from things authoritarians do well. They build communities. Now, yes, they're building them often based on like ideologies of hate, but they build them. Trump gave everybody a cap and let them feel like they were in a tribe. They communicate in dynamic ways. They truly do. Trump is a superb propagandist. And they express emotion, and they use their bodies in very charismatic ways. So here's Erdogan, who's an awful despot, in my personal opinion. And he engages in what I call strategic crying. There's actually a very good scholarly article on this, where if he's arresting people or he feels threatened, his power, he cries a lot in public. And you can you can tabulate it to know the crying goes up, and the arrests go up. So, or Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro was stabbed when he was running for office. And so he has to go in the hospital. He used to go in the hospital periodically. Every time the guy was in there, he would live stream or he would send photographs of himself hooked up to machines with the same, hideous, colored, walls and tray tables that everybody has in the hospital. And it builds identification. So that's the man of the people. The man like everyone else, but the man above all other men, because then he comes out stronger than ever. And so it's a theatrical thing. And I'm not saying that Democrats should start, that Pete Buttigieg or somebody should start having pictures with his heart monitor or whatever. But there are things we can learn from the way they communicate with followers and use emotion. And imagine the power if it were real emotion, rather than Trump, who says, "I love you," but he actually hates them and he's trying to fleece them. He's trying to get money from them. Imagine the power of an authentic emotion, right? Another one, very worrisome, Giorgia Meloni, the new neo-fascist prime minister of Italy. So she uses filters and she has flowers behind her and she says she's conservative, but she's extreme. She's a real neo-fascist, but she's a great communicator. She's great, which is not good for democracy. So relying on dated messaging models and electoral strategies based on simplistic assumptions about voters has also cost Democrats. And this isn't just in the States, but an example from here, US Democrats kept thinking that Latinos would just naturally vote for them because the GOP was, being so racist against immigrants. And then that's not how the voting worked out. I also follow Democratic debacles in the 2022 elections in Hungary, Italy, and Israel, where each place, the center-left, either came off as very elitist, totally out of touch with working class, or they wouldn't unite, the opposition wouldn't unite against the right, or they failed to articulate a real progressive alternative. And one of the big lessons is sometimes when you're faced with far right, you think, oh, I'm going to move to the center, and then we'll get some of those voters. That never works. I've been monitoring these things. It hasn't worked at all. You have to actually stand for something, right? That's different. That's a progressive alternative. So really, when you look around, you can learn from mistakes, but we're seeing the seeds of what I think will be a new anti-authoritarian order. And if you know where to look for the green shoots, you do see that they're coming up. So here's a quote: "Dictatorships put people to sleep, and the ones brave enough to fight it are youth." If illiberal politicians in Moscow, Budapest, Rome, and Tallahassee, Florida, DeSantis, are now orchestrating and obsessed with wokeness, right? They orchestrating campaigns against wokeness. It's because they know that millions have begun a collective reckoning with corrupt and repressive authoritarian institutions. We go back to the protests that put us into peril. And really, if you're not supposed to be woke, they actually want you to go to sleep and self-censor and be silent and dumb. And it's pretty obvious, the anti-woke thing. It's like, yeah, we're supposed to go to sleep. So when I found this quote, it's in Strongmen. It's very apropos. So around the world, people are charting new paths, breaking with tired conventions, incentivizing democracy, pro-democracy behaviors, and actually reimagining power in ways that challenge the strongmen. So here is a democratic hero of mine, Ekrem İmamoğlu. He's the mayor of he's the mayor of Istanbul in Turkey, and he ran on a radical love platform that is very important, and he didn't want to do rallies because he felt they staged like authoritarian dynamics, like the leader in the mass. So he walked the streets, he hugged people, and he targeted especially Erdogan followers and people who he wanted to understand. He listened to them. He did bridge building. He basically did bridge building, and he won. And he's enormously popular. Unfortunately for him, he's so popular, he's like the only man who could beat Erdogan in the upcoming presidential elections. So even before Erdogan got more into trouble because of the earthquake, this is how electoral autocracy works. You keep elections going, but you game the system. Erdogan sentenced this man to 2 years in prison for insulting him. It just trumped up an excuse so that you say, and so Erdogan says, oh, we're not a dictatorship, we have elections, but then this guy is probably going to go to prison for 2 years, so he can't run. So, but that shows you how threatening the radical love, and he is a green shoot. He is the future. Also, New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern did a very interesting thing. In 2019, as her economic planning, she adopted what's called the Happiness Index. It's a metric that measures societal outcomes of kindness and compassion and puts them alongside traditional measures of prosperity. So it's not just does it cause money, it's does it make people healthier and happier. And so she officially put that as part of the budget planning. That's an interesting thing. And finally, in our own country, we have the Green New Deal, which links, and it's in the links that make it important, fossil fuel impunity, as they call it, economic inequality, and concentrations of power through billionaire and dark money. So making these links. So these are just some things. We're also seeing the start of a move beyond neoliberalism, which has been a huge driver of economic inequality, alienation, and it's justified plunder of all kinds of resources, as you know. And many economists are starting to see, and it's fueled by the pandemic too, a move away from this and toward economic policies that are reinforcing community and social justice. So support for trade and manufacturing policies that are sensitive to environmental standards. And then a big thing, which really comes out of necessity, changes in supply chains to support manufacturing and commerce closer to home, right? And community input into economic policy. The economist Diane Coyle at Cambridge is starting to write about how communities should be brought into the economic policy. So I'll mention just one more and then conclude. There's other developments are playing out nationally. And I watched Chile. Chile is always been a laboratory for things. A case study in my book is the 1973 US-backed coup. And that's where they tested out neoliberalism. So now, there's a left-wing government, progressive government, with a 36-year-old, maybe he's 37 now, president, Gabriel Boric. And he decided to have a new constitution because the old one was still linked to the Pinochet regime. It had been amended, but it was still originated in the dictatorship. So he produced a document that truly, it's just a visionary document. It gives voice to social and economic justice priorities that progressives all over the world prize. It mandates gender parity in government and public companies. It requires the government to intervene on climate change. It addresses economic inequality that had caused the protests in 2019. And this is very interesting. It defines Chile as plurinational to recognize the indigenous people who make up 11% of the population. And representatives of Mapuche and other indigenous peoples were involved in the drafting. They had commissions and all kinds of things. And finally, and this is moving too, it provides rights to animals and rights to nature. Okay, so like many visionary, amazing things, it was hated by many. Chileans rejected it, 62%, and it's now being redrafted. Boric's approval rating is sinking, but he said last year, if Chile was the cradle of neoliberalism, it will also be its grave. So I don't know how long he'll be around. But he's 36, and he knew there was going to maybe be a price. But this is a document of our anti-authoritarian future. Perhaps it's a utopian document, but it's very important that it's there. Okay, to conclude, so this is every country gets the gangster it deserves. And this was a guy who grew up under Mussolini, fought in the resistance, and it's kind of a bitter reflection. But authoritarian leaders are gangsters. So my background studying fascism let me understand the danger our changing political environment represented for democracy in America. And it was frustrating to me to see how slowly the media and much of the public grasped the gravity of the situation. Like, because of what I study, I saw Trump with a loyalty oath, and I was like, uh-oh. And then saying he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue. There were these very early, they're not even flags, they're red, I don't know what to call, what's a huge flag? Banners. And yet, in writing Strongmen, I saw that whenever and wherever autocrats have appeared, societies have struggled to recognize the danger in front of their eyes. Acknowledging that, quote, it can happen here, means giving up cherished notions about national identity. For example, Germans said, we're not going to have this clown Hitler. We're so cultured. And Germany, in fact, it was one of the world's leader in the 20s and 30s of science, engineering, medicine, graphic design, unbelievable culture of graphic design and Weimar culture. They thought, we're not going to have this guy with the mustache who screams. We're not going to have him. And then Chileans, even when you have a coup and there isn't people running for election, you still have this surprise. Chileans said, we're not going to have a coup. We're not like those Bolivians and those, Guatemalans. We're loyal to our army is very ethical. We're not going to have a coup. So American democracy is, of course, young, dating, in my opinion, from the civil rights era only. And the US, as we know, has a very long history of helping other countries to lose their freedom, including Chile. Right? And yet, the idea that freedom could be endangered here at a national level, because we had regional authoritarianism in the South, that was it. But the national level with a dictator whatever that looks like today. This was totally foreign to many people. It's a leap that they couldn't make. So when I started writing about Trump in 2015 and 16, I saw there was a lack of knowledge about the authoritarian playbook and what it looks like today, because it's not going to look like Mussolini's one-party state. It works differently today. So I put aside an academic book I was doing on World War II, and I decided to focus on civic education. And I chose to write about for CNN, because many academics, they want to write for the New York Review of Books or the elite places, New York Times. I thought, no, I got to write for CNN because you reach huge numbers of people. So you get letters, some of them are not nice, but from people, all kinds of people, right? And that's, if civic education is your goal, you have to write for USA Today, out those places, right? So now I give hundreds of interviews every year on how authoritarianism works and how democracy can be made more appealing and workable for future generations. And this public outreach work is why I'm so excited to be here with you as the Inouye Chair of Democratic Ideals. It's so much in tune with my mission. And as the examples I've given show, we're going to need to think outside the box, have the courage to break with convention, and also to see convention as informed by class and racial and gender assumptions. And this starts perhaps with revising our ideas of leadership. Why not give democratic leaders the star treatment that's been lavished on these strongmen, right? Why not find them sex symbols? Why not find them, whatever, amazing people who you're going to have in a poster? And support other models of exercising authority and power. And this is sorely needed. So here is Putin hanging out. Now, this is his machismo, and it's dosed out when he's in trouble. So these were very large anti-Putin protests in 2019. So he goes, the day of the biggest one in Moscow, he goes out with his biker friends and has a photo op. And this was unproblematic for the national, of course, the national press, but the international press. So how come this is okay and this is not okay? So here's Prime Minister, she's in her 30s, Sanna Marin. She just finished negotiating Finland's accession to NATO. That's kind of a big deal. And she went out partying with her friends. She's like 36 or 37. Big scandal, not just in Finland, but all over the world. She shouldn't be doing this, it's not professional. So how come this is okay with these thugs? And this isn't okay, right? So we have to develop models of power that see care, collaboration, and compassion as strengths, not weaknesses, and revise our notions of power and leadership. It won't be easy, but there's too much at risk for us not to try. Thank you. She was asking in a very humorous, but it's not funny, right, way about how did Meloni get into power as the authoritarian prime minister, given that unlike Marine Le Pen, who had her father, there's often a man around them. She had a man around her, and that was Berlusconi. But Giorgia Meloni, in fact, in the conclusion of Strongmen, Strongmen is about a certain configuration of male power. And in the conclusion, I said that there would be inevitably a female-led authoritarian state. I thought it would be Marine Le Pen, who may still get there because she's getting closer every election. But it turned out to be Meloni, which you can imagine, she was elected the 100th anniversary of the foundation of fascism. It's like totally depressing in some ways, but very instructive. She is a hardcore neo-fascist who was the head of the militant neo-fascist youth group when she was 15 years old. So she came up in an intensely misogynistic climate, and she's very tough, But her mentors, I always say, one is Mussolini, because she kind of models her speaking on him. If you've spent hundreds of hours looking, unfortunately, at Mussolini, like newsreels, I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. But she does these Mussolini things with her eyes. It's kind of scary. But Berlusconi was the one who made her a minister. And he was the person who mainstreamed the far right. He's very important. Nobody cares about him. He was the first person to put fascists into power since 1945. All the stuff we are going through with the normalization of Nazis, he did this in Italy. And she came out of that climate. So she has like the guarantee of she's internalized the patriarchy. She's trying to take away abortion rights, and yet people say, "Oh, it's so great for women. She's there, and she's this young woman." So this is called gender washing, right? And the president of Hungary is another case. She's a female president of Hungary, and Orban, in theory, is below her. But she was his minister of youth and family, and she's responsible for the fascist demographic style policies. We want Hungarian babies only, white Christian babies only. So you're going to see more and more of these women, and the right has been very hospitable to women who internalize the patriarchy enough to support demographic things that actually harm women, and yet exercise power. So thank you for asking about that.
One of the foundations of these people, this may sound naive, but it isn't, is the distrust of each other. That we need him or her to lead us when we do not trust each other. The more we can build trust among each other, the less likely these strongmen will have a wedge to perpetuate their leadership. It's trusting each other to do the right thing. And that is the foundation of democracy. And it's to look out for everyone. And you said economists are coming around to this. The economists are what did Chile in the Milton Friedman's, which the distrust, you're only looking out for yourself. You're not looking out for others. Mm-hmm. And that is, that is a core issue. So thank you.
Sure. No, and it's not just that they actively encourage distrust. That's what polarization is. You divide, it's also called divide and rule, right? You get everyone to distrust one another, and then they only are supposed to trust you. So that's the dynamic, and it's very destructive. They also turn people against the press very early on. You can, if you want to know, how do you track an emerging strongman, they start attacking the press so that by the time you won't trust, that source of news, you only trust them. Mussolini is always right. Right? So there's a whole pattern, but trust is key. So thank you for bringing that up. Maya.
Oh, wait, sorry.
Oh, okay.
So, you mentioned about how the leaders are seen as charismatic and such, but how do you sort of counter that from the left, or at least the anti-authoritarian side, when it seems that those the characteristics that are seen as charismatic are basically appealing to that authoritarian mindset. Somebody who's not doesn't see them as charismatic. So, how do you get an alternative that will appeal to the other people?
How do you build an anti-authoritarian charisma, in a way? Well, we need to do it. Why shouldn't we have it? Right? There's no time to go into it, but I tracked very closely John Fetterman campaign. And he actually, in his struggles, first with a stroke and now depression, and the way he was he went after working class, and his logo is modeled on the craftsman. He was solidity, and yet he's fragility. This is a kind of gesticulating toward an anti-authoritarian masculinity. They're very interesting. Think about who is out there who is modeling a different form masculinity. And in our country, it's super important because Tucker Carlson's making like semi-porn films about masculinity. Josh Hawley, the senator, is writing a book on masculinity. They're all in for brutalist masculinity, and we need to counter that, right? To have that be our charisma, as well as not just with men, certainly. Yeah, she was asking about the role of media and what can we do to have media contribute to this kind of anti-authoritarian agenda. It was a much more complex and eloquently worded question, but that's the gist. I mean, yes, we need to reverse certain extremely destructive trends like the death of local newspapers. They are the voices of the community, right? And it is happening. There are foundations that are trying to give seed money to local newspapers or make new local newspapers. I think we're at a really interesting time because there's also people of all political persuasions are really getting quite fed up with some of the biggest newspapers. The New York Times sometimes functions as a center-right paper, and when I say that, people go crazy on Twitter. But they do sometimes, and it's not, so we need, people are seeing, they don't know what else there is, but even like the phenomenon of the newsletters, the Substack newsletters, I have one, it's like everyone has one, but it's a sign of being fed up with the kind of narrowing options that, even if you're just an opinion writer, you're not working professionally, what they will print. So we're in a period of transition, right? And even what happened to Twitter with Mr. Fascist Troll Elon Musk, where it caused people to start Mastodon and post. I haven't had time to I have accounts, but I don't have time to go on there. But it's important. It's important to do that. So I haven't answered your question specifically because the more these big papers become corporate, owned by billionaires, et cetera, the harder it is. But starting with local and listening to individual voices who are outside of the system, those are two things.
Okay, we have maybe time for 3 to 4 more questions, but I've been asked to remind folks that we're going to have a book signing after this, so be sure to stick around. We'll be outside. So I think we've got 1, 2, 3, and then we'll see what we've got, where we are.
Thank you for an enlightening talk. I just heard on today's news that Oleg Deripaska, one of Putin's oligarchs, came out and publicly criticized him. Up until now, it seems like Putin has squashed all protests and all dissent and either pushed them out windows or poisoned them or jailed them. What do you think is going to happen to Deripaska? And is it a sign that maybe if nothing happens, there are more opportunities to express opposition?
Yeah, it's highly dangerous for Putin that people like that start criticizing him. And that's why the favorite dictator game is, quote, setting an example. That's why people are, perishing in strange ways to get other people to shut up. This is called elite defection, and it happens at the end of a regime when they've gotten into this problem situation like Putin has, and it can take a very, very long time because it's so dangerous. But it happened also. Mass protest is most effective if you can get elites to be in there with you. Here we have individual elites who start speaking out. Now, why are they speaking out? It's because they were all bought into his kleptocracy, and now they're losing their profits, and they're going to divest. So I don't know what will happen to him. Sometimes Putin does odd things where he doesn't punish somebody, or but the trend is that over time, more and more of them are going to move away from him, I believe.
Thank you very much for your talk. That was really fascinating. And I was thinking through parts of it about what was learned and maybe lost through the Occupy movement, which was a kind of groundswell movement as well. And that also made me think about, you focus a lot on anti-authoritarianism. And one part of it, I'm wondering what you think about, especially in relation to the 18 to 25-year-olds, is the place of anarchy, right? Because we know that young people are often, some of those movements have this anarchist undercurrent. So I wanted to hear you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I don't know too much about the state of leftist anarchy. I can say that the GOP is using, well, part of the right-wing playbook of Bannon, Steve Bannon and others, is to create a huge amount of chaos in society and be as destructive as possible, and also use violence and kind of be destructive of government processes. And so in a way, they've appropriated some of this. You know, Mussolini used to talk, he'd been a socialist, a revolutionary socialist. He used to talk about productive anarchy. So I feel like that is going on, right? But I don't know what the state is of that strain of the left. Yeah.
Hi, thank you very much for your talk. I'm really concerned about the left and its response to authoritarianism. You know, the left is supposed to be a place where you can count on anti-authoritarian politics. And I've been concerned for some time. Like, I started noticing it with the response to Assad and the brutality in Syria against the resistance there, where so much of the left in the United States, as well as in the UK and elsewhere in the rich world, where you saw this notion that because there may be some element in the United States that supports the resistance against Assad, that we must support Assad, right? And you're seeing a kind of similar process happening with Putin and many other dictators around the world. So could you speak to how we deal with that?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, right? Because, so the people who are critical of American imperialism, for those who are not familiar with this, I'm just going to state one part of it. Some of them don't want the U.S. to be more actively involved in Ukraine because they see it as an excuse to ramp up American imperialism again. I personally find this totally misguided, because if we don't, you know what happens with autocrats, it's so scary. Every day Putin's out there still being allowed to wage this war, all the other autocrats are watching. That's what they do. Because Hitler moved the way he did because he watched Mussolini and nobody stopped Mussolini. The first appeasement was not Munich, it was Ethiopia. Nobody cared. So who's watching? Xi Jinping is like really watching. Erdogan was watching and getting all crazy imperialist. Now this earthquake partly stopped him. So when one autocrat is not stopped, the others ramp up their own imperialist aggressions. So that particular line of thought, I think, is very dangerous almost, although it's true that America has been a huge imperialist power, but I think this is not the correct venue or case for this, because it's everyone who says, from Zelensky down, that fighting Ukraine is not just about Ukraine, it's about saving global democracy is correct.
So clearly there's a lot of hunger for this kind of knowledge. We will try to appease this a little with some cookies and tea outside. That will come with a book signing, so please go buy the book, learn some more, ask Ruth questions, but let's please give Ruth a round of applause.